Sometimes, power ends up in the hands of one person who uses it for their own interests, leading to dictatorship. By eliminating all competitors and silencing dissent, dictators destroy the economy, mass murder citizens, and start wars. This can go on for decades. Today, we will talk about 5 brutal dictators of the 20th century. This list will not include the well-known tyrants, but will discuss less-known figures who committed equally horrific crimes. If you enjoy our history videos, subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. Pol Pot was the leader of Cambodia's Communist Party since the 1960s. During the Second Indochina War. This war included civil wars and the Vietnam War, in which the USA intervened. For many years, the Communists fought against the pro-American regime, and finally, in 1975, Pol Pot seized power. The country was then ruled by the so-called Khmer Rouge, a special movement within the Communist Party, with Pol Pot as their leader. After the communist victory, people hoped for some peace and improvement in their lives, but they did not know that Pol Pot had his own views on the ideal society. Within a few days, all residents of Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, were forced into villages. There were more than 2 million of them. The Khmer Rouge considered cities to be dens of vice and counter-revolution that needed to be destroyed. In their view, only agriculture could help build communism. Later, people were forced to leave other cities as well. Of course, there was no proper evacuation, and people were forced to walk tens and hundreds of kilometers at gunpoint. Thousands died of exhaustion, and the economy collapsed due to the abandonment of cities. The population of the country was then divided into 3 groups: old village residents, new village residents, and reactionary intelligentsia. The latter included, for example, priests, cultural figures, and civil servants. Pol Pot intended to almost completely exterminate this group. Massive repressions began in the country, and people could be arrested even for wearing glasses. The Khmer Rouge executed hundreds of thousands of people, and hundreds of thousands more died of starvation. Within a few years, the regime claimed the lives of at least 2 million Cambodians, almost a third of the country's population. The dictator was overthrown when another war with Vietnam began. He fled into the forests and led the resistance for many years. Pol Pot died in 1998, never answering for his crimes. The Ugandan military leader Idi Amin established one of the most brutal regimes in history. Upon coming to power, he expelled all non-black residents from the country and nationalized their property. Lacking any understanding of how the economy works, Amin attempted to manage it personally. As a result, Uganda teetered on the brink of famine and humanitarian catastrophe, with corruption and embezzlement reaching unimaginable levels. While the population starved, the dictator spared no luxuries for himself. Amin was one of the most flamboyant rulers in world history. For example, he conferred upon himself the titles of Conqueror of the British Empire and King of Scotland. He once declared war on the United States but quickly ended it and declared himself the victor. Despite his eccentricities, Amin was incredibly cruel and bloodthirsty. Immediately upon taking power, he created death squads that quickly dealt with all his competitors and continued to kill anyone deemed undesirable. Amin had an intense hatred for the tribes living in Uganda and exterminated tens of thousands of their members. Over 500,000 people died during his rule, with Amin personally executing several thousand. He also engaged in cannibalism and openly admitted it. Amin maneuvered on the international stage, seeking support from the United States, Great Britain, and the USSR. However, in 1978, Uganda declared war on Tanzania and lost international support. The dictator's army was defeated, and he was forced to flee the country. Despite receiving numerous threats, Amin lived until 2003, dying from high blood pressure. Saddam Hussein became an activist for the Ba'ath Party in his youth, a party that had a significant influence in the Middle East. Its ideology aimed to unite all Arabs into a single state. Saddam quickly rose to become one of the party's leaders. In 1968, the Ba'athists orchestrated a coup and came to power, making Hussein the second most powerful person in Iraq, though he was effectively the one leading the country. Iraq received vast amounts of money from oil sales, and Hussein used these funds to implement large-scale reforms. He fought against illiteracy and poverty. At the same time, he persecuted dissenters and opposed Iraqi Kurds, who lived in an autonomous region within Iraq. Saddam's secret police imprisoned, tortured, and executed thousands of opposition members. Gradually, the dictator eliminated all his rivals, and all power became concentrated in his hands. Upon becoming president of Iraq, Saddam initiated a short victorious war with neighboring Iran, where an Islamic revolution had taken place. However, a swift triumph did not occur, and the conflict dragged on for 8 years. Inside the country, another war was being fought against the Kurds. In the Anfal campaign, more than 100,000 people were killed, including through the use of chemical weapons. The Iran-Iraq War claimed about 1 million lives and turned the economies of both countries into ruins. It was the largest military conflict since World War II. But the defeat did not stop Saddam. Almost immediately after the war ended, the Iraqi army began the occupation of Kuwait, a small neighboring country with vast oil reserves. Saddam aimed to boost the economy after the devastation of the Iran-Iraq War. The UN, including even the USSR, approved an international military operation to liberate Kuwait. As a result, the Iraqi economy was completely destroyed, and Iraq became one of the poorest countries in the world. To remain in power, Saddam began suppressing popular protests with the army's help. During his rule, he created a cult of personality, erected monuments to himself, and forced schoolchildren to praise the great leader. Corruption reached such levels that Saddam became one of the richest people on the planet. Hussein's regime was overthrown in 2003 during the US invasion of Iraq. For crimes against humanity, the genocide of the Kurds, the use of the army against protesters, and waging wars, the Supreme Court of Iraq sentenced Saddam Hussein to death. However, the dictator's death did not bring peace and tranquility to Iraq. Mobutu Sese Seko, the former president of Congo, may not be remembered as one of the most brutal and bloodthirsty dictators in history. However, he is a striking example of what a dictatorship can lead to. After eliminating all his competitors and becoming the sole ruler, Mobutu began to govern with the grand style befitting an African dictator. Harboring a strong dislike for communists and suppressing them by any means, Mobutu became one of the United States' allies in Africa. For his fight against leftists, the US forgave him any sins. Mobutu established a large-scale cult of personality in the country and brutally dealt with any opposition, including shooting at demonstrations. Moreover, his inept economic policies brought Congo to the brink of catastrophe. During his rule, the country became the poorest in the world, while Mobutu and his family and friends wallowed in luxury. While the Congolese people starved, Mobutu would fly to Paris for shopping trips. Over his years in power, he embezzled up to $15 billion from the Congolese budget and became one of the richest people in the world. After the shooting of student demonstrations in the early 1990s, Mobutu lost the support of Western countries, and his power waned. Congo was drawn into a war with Rwanda and Uganda, during which Mobutu was overthrown. Almost immediately after his exile, he died from a severe illness, and Congo has since struggled to recover from the ruins in which the dictator left it. Franco was one of the most brutal European dictators, ruling Spain with an iron fist for almost 40 years. Coming to power after the Civil War, Franco began to cleanse the country of any possible resistance, using secret police, extrajudicial killings, labor camps, and concentration camps. Franco claimed up to 200,000 Spanish lives. In addition to political activists, the regime targeted Basques and Catalans, as Franco wanted to suppress their nationalism at any cost. In the 1950s, Franco's regime softened and moved away from direct terror, but the hunt for opposition members continued. They were no longer killed but imprisoned for long periods. Any non-state and political organizations were banned, censorship was total, and rallies and protests were brutally suppressed by the police. However, during Franco's decades-long rule, Spain transformed from one of the poorest countries in Europe into an economic giant, and the standard of living significantly improved. But this does not justify the dictatorship and repression. Franco died in 1975 after numerous illnesses. He hoped that the king he appointed, Juan Carlos I of Spain, would continue his legacy, but instead, the king initiated political reforms and transformed the country into a full democracy. These are not all the dictators in world history. The 20th century saw many bloodthirsty and cruel rulers who claimed thousands of lives and destroyed entire countries. But these examples best illustrate the dangers of unchecked power.